What if I told you that what you fear most about yourself is not a flaw, but the greatest secret you have been hiding? What if the reason you often feel exhausted, misunderstood, and out of place is not because there is something broken within you, but because you feel too deeply in a world designed to feel almost nothing? Think about that for a moment. Every day, you walk among people who only brush the surface of life, as if everything were a blurred reflection. But you move through it all. You feel the silences more than the words. You perceive the cracks behind the masks. You notice the invisible weight that others carry without admitting it. That intensity that pulls you in, that sometimes burns you, is exactly what sets you apart. But here is the real question. How much longer can you pretend not to see what you see, or not to feel what you feel? How much longer will you keep hiding your true self, just to fit into a society that demands you be flat, fast, and shallow? Let me warn you. What you're about to hear may make you uncomfortable. It may even scare you, because it is not meant to soothe you, but to tear away the blindfold from your eyes. And I promise you this, if you stay with me until the end, you will understand why your sensitivity is not your curse, but your greatest power. You will discover how to stop living it as a burden and begin to use it as the key that opens the door to a more authentic life. What no one has told you is that extreme sensitivity is not simply about feeling more. It is about perceiving reality in layers that most people never even sense. Where others only see the surface, you detect the most subtle vibrations, the overlooked details, the faint signals that reveal the truth behind every scene. And while this may sound like a gift, in a world that rushes blindly forward, it can feel like a constant torment. Because you don't just absorb emotions, you absorb tensions, hidden fears, falseness, disguised in smiles. You carry it all inside you, as if you were a magnet for the invisible. Haven't you noticed? You walk into a room, and without a word being spoken, you already know what is happening. You can feel who is uncomfortable, who is hiding anger, who is dead inside. Your brain and your body process more stimuli than they should, and this drains you even in moments when nothing seems to be happening at all. That is the trap. You live in a permanent state of alert because your nervous system never rests. And meanwhile, others cannot understand why you come home feeling as though you've run a marathon without moving an inch. This is where the first great wound of highly sensitive people appears: isolation. When you try to explain what you feel, most people look at you with disbelief, as if you were exaggerating, as if you were weak. So you learn to remain silent, to disguise it, to carry your intensity as if it were a shameful secret. Little by little, you build a mask to survive, but that mask becomes a prison. Outwardly, you live as others expect you to, but inwardly, you feel as though you are betraying your essence. And here is the unsettling part. That betrayal is not accidental. It is programmed by the very system we live in. Carl Jung explained it in a brutal way. What we repress within ourselves does not disappear. It hides in the shadow, and from there, it devours us little by little. When you repress your sensitivity, you do not extinguish it, you twist it. And what was once a source of connection with life transforms into anxiety, into chronic sadness, into a persistent sense of emptiness. That is the cost of trying to fit into a world that cannot tolerate depth. Have you ever asked yourself why society fears emotional depth so much? It is because depth is uncomfortable. Intensity exposes contradictions that everyone prefers to ignore. We live in a culture that applauds speed and punishes stillness, where superficiality is equated with success and reflection is branded as unproductive. And yet, with your way of feeling, you are an uncomfortable reminder of what others don't want to face, that beneath their mechanical routines lies a void that never gets filled. But here lies the key that almost no one ever mentions. The discomfort you stir in others is proof of your authenticity. Emotional depth is not meant to conform to a shallow society. It is meant to transcend it. The problem is not your intensity. The problem is the environment that tries to reduce it to ashes. And the solution will never be to bend yourself until you break, but to find or create spaces where your intensity has a rightful place to exist. Now let me ask you something unsettling. What would happen if you stopped repressing who you are? I'm not talking about small doses. I'm talking about unleashing the full energy within you, showing yourself as you truly feel, without filters and without masks. Yes, some people would walk away because they cannot handle that clarity, but others, those who have also been hiding for years, would recognize you instantly, because sensitivity, when it is not hidden, is contagious. It is like a light that allows others to remember that they are not alone in their own intensity. And here is the haunting twist. Most of the people you admire for their art, their creativity, or their vision were once misunderstood for this very reason. Do you really think that Kafka, Van Gogh, Virginia Woolf, or Nietzsche were normal in the way they perceived the world? No. What was unbearable for them was unacceptable for society. And yet, when they stopped hiding and transformed that pain into expression, they became eternal references. Emotional intensity, when it is channeled, leaves indelible marks on the world. This is why you must understand something now. Your sensitivity is not an obstacle to overcome. It is the raw material of your greatness. What you have mistaken for weakness is actually a compass guiding you toward a level of consciousness that very few will ever touch. And here comes the most intriguing part. Every time you force yourself to fit into superficiality, you betray that compass. But every time you remain faithful to what you feel, you open an invisible door to a more authentic life. That door may not be visible to others, but the dilemma is merciless. Would you rather live comfortably in a lie or uncomfortably in your truth? Because the truth is that you cannot extinguish your sensitivity. You can numb it for a while, you can bury it under layers of noise, distractions, and appearances, but sooner or later, it will rise again. And when it does, it will rise with force, demanding the space you never gave it. That moment can either destroy you or set you free. The choice depends on what you decide now. And here is a warning few dare to speak. The more you repress your essence, the more fragmented you become. And the more fragmented you are, the easier it is for the system to manipulate you, because it feeds on your disconnection. Society doesn't want you to think too much, to feel too much, to question too much. It wants you distracted, fast, obedient. But you were not born for that. Your sensitivity is proof that your consciousness is awake, and that is the greatest threat to a world built on superficiality. And now comes the promise I made to you at the beginning. Stay with me until the end, because I will show you how to transform this sensitivity that you see as a weight into the greatest of your strengths. You are going to discover how to stop living it as a sentence and start using it as a silent weapon to free yourself from the pressure to conform. You will come to understand why feeling deeply is not a mistake, but the undeniable proof that you are more alive than most. People think sensitivity is purely emotional, as if it were only about feeling sadness, joy, or anger with greater intensity. But what almost no one realizes is that this depth also affects your perception, your way of interpreting reality in all its detail. It is as if your mind were equipped with a magnifying glass you cannot turn off, forcing you to see cracks where others only see smooth walls. And yes, that excess of perception has a cost. You live with an overstimulated mind, capturing every stimulus, every vibration, every gesture, until even the smallest detail becomes an entire universe inside you. This creates a fascinating paradox. While others move blindly, almost numbed to their own existence, you gather an overwhelming amount of emotional and sensory information. But unlike them, your mind does not discard it. It stores it, organizes it, dissects it, and interprets it with a precision that most people cannot begin to imagine. This heightened awareness allows you to perceive connections that slip unnoticed by the majority. That is why so many highly sensitive individuals develop an intuition that seems almost otherworldly, as if they could anticipate events before they unfold. It is not magic. It is sensitivity in action, the ability to detect patterns invisible to others, to sense hidden threads that weave reality together. And yet, how does the world usually treat this quality? It is minimized, mocked, labeled as exaggeration or paranoia. Here lies one of the great dilemmas of those who feel too deeply. You begin to mistrust your own perception. When you insist on what you see and others dismiss it, you eventually begin to doubt yourself. That self-deception is devastating because it turns your greatest gift into your greatest insecurity. And when the mind betrays what it knows to be true, it begins to fracture. Carl Jung once described this with brutal clarity. Neurosis is the suffering of a soul that has not found its meaning. If your sensitivity is treated as a burden rather than a gift, the outcome is not harmony, but inner division. The most disturbing part is that this denial does not originate within you. It comes from society itself. We live in a world obsessed with what is obvious, measurable, and verifiable within seconds. Your capacity to perceive the invisible makes others uncomfortable because it reminds them that there are dimensions of existence they neither control nor understand. And how does society usually react to what it cannot understand? It ridicules it. It reduces it to convenient labels: exaggerated, dramatic, intense. These words act as blunt weapons, designed not to explain you, but to tame what cannot be explained. But here is the truth no one dares to say. What they call exaggeration is actually sensitivity to truth. You perceive what others deny, and that kind of clarity cannot be bought, imitated, or silenced. However, that clarity comes with a sacrifice, the willingness to live surrounded by misunderstanding. And that sacrifice can lead to two radically different paths. You either become a prisoner of your perception, suffocated by it, or you learn to master it until it becomes your most dangerous strength. Imagine this for a moment. Each time you feel your own intensity crushing you, it is not because you are weak. It is because you have not yet learned how to direct that energy. Your sensitivity is like a river in flood. When it has no channel, it destroys everything in its way. But if you discover how to guide it, that same river becomes a source of creativity, lucidity, and genuine connection that can transform not only your life, but the lives of others. That is the difference between those who drown in their intensity and those who build something extraordinary with it. Now let me take you to a darker realization. Modern society does not simply ignore sensitivity, it exploits it. Think about how often you feel overwhelmed by the endless noise of news, social media, constant messages, and distractions. Do you really believe this is accidental? It is not. The machinery of overstimulation is designed to suppress the sensitive, to bury your depth beneath mountains of noise, so that you never have a moment of silence. Because silence is where your clarity emerges. And here is the brutal paradox. What this system fears most is not your fragility, it is your clarity. Someone who feels too much cannot be manipulated easily because they perceive the hidden intentions behind every speech, every strategy, every performance. This is why your sensitivity is more than a condition. It is an act of resistance. To feel deeply in a world that demands numbness is to stand silently against the established order. That is why the most sensitive often become the most critical, the most creative, the least willing to accept superficial answers. Your discomfort is not a curse. It is proof that you do not swallow the prefabricated script. The real question is not how to stop being sensitive, but how to protect that sensitivity so it does not consume you before you learn to wield it as a weapon. And here lies a crucial truth. It is not about adapting, it is about creating refuges, both internal and external, where your intensity is not a weight, but a shared language. Those spaces will not simply appear. You will have to build them. You will have to search for them like oxygen in a poisoned city. The fascinating thing is that once you begin to value your sensitivity, instead of hiding it, something extraordinary happens. People who have long felt invisible begin to reveal themselves around you. It is as if your authenticity activates theirs. What was once loneliness transforms into connection. Not with everyone, for most will remain trapped on the surface, but with the few who truly deserve to be in your life. And now comes the idea that might unsettle you even more. What if the suffering you have endured was never a curse, but an initiation? What if every tear, every moment of rejection, every night of solitude was the price of a vision of the world that most will never access? Because what others call weakness may actually be a threshold, and only those who dare to cross it can live with the raw intensity of reality, without masks, without disguises, without anesthetic. That threshold stands before you now. The decision is yours, to keep denying it and extinguish your fire, or to cross it and discover that your sensitivity, far from being your downfall, is the key that opens doors others cannot even imagine. And now, listen closely, because we have reached the most delicate truth of all. Few people have the courage to admit this. If you are born with the ability to feel intensely, you will never be able to extinguish it. You can pretend, you can hide behind distractions, you can numb yourself with noise, but eventually your essence will rise to the surface. And when it does, it will return with all the force of what you have been suppressing. That eruption can either destroy you or set you free. And the only difference will be what you choose to do today. Never forget this. What now feels like an unbearable burden, your burning sensitivity, may in fact be the root of your purpose. And the world needs it more than ever. It needs people who can go beyond appearances, people who are unafraid of feeling, who do not run from discomfort, who refuse to settle for hollow reflections of what it means to live. Your depth is not a defect. It is evidence that you carry within you a form of consciousness that transcends the ordinary. And here is the message I want to engrave in your mind. Do not try to heal your sensitivity by extinguishing it. Heal it by embracing it. True power is not in adapting to the superficial, but in creating a space where depth is welcomed. It is not about fitting in. It is about resisting. Resisting the urge to hide. Resisting the temptation to betray yourself. Resisting the pressure of a world that demands you be less than what you are. Let me tell you something you may never forget. Sensitivity is not a weakness. It is the scar of being alive. Every time you feel that you are too much, remember this. Your intensity is proof that your heart still beats with force, while most walk the earth half asleep. And that, believe me, is a privilege. If you have listened this far, it means something in these words has touched you. So I will ask you to do something simple. Share a single sentence that resonates with you the most, because your words might become a mirror for someone still lost in their intensity. And if you want to continue exploring these truths that few dare to speak, stay here. This is not a place for shallow discourse. This is a place where depth is not hidden, but celebrated. So let go of the idea that your sensitivity is a curse. Begin to see it as the compass that will guide you through a world that has lost itself in haste. And remember, to feel intensely is the last act of rebellion on a planet anesthetized by distraction. Perhaps we will meet again in the next message, or perhaps not. Perhaps we will cross paths only in that invisible space where those who dare to feel still exist. And when that moment comes, you will recognize it, because no words will be needed at all. There is something you only come to understand when you reach 40, something the young cannot grasp, no matter how intelligent they may seem. It is not knowledge nor mere experience, but something far deeper and infinitely more valuable. Carl Jung, the Swiss thinker who explored the depths of the human psyche, discovered this truth by observing the transformation that appears once maturity begins to unfold. And what he found goes against everything we usually believe about youth and aging. Most assume that turning 40 marks the beginning of decline, that it is when you start losing things: energy, beauty, opportunities, time. But Jung saw the opposite. He noticed that at 40, you gain something impossible to have at 20, something that completely changes the way you live. And I am not talking about wisdom or maturity. Those are the obvious outcomes. I am speaking of something far more revolutionary, something society has completely forgotten, but which Jung identified as the true foundation of authentic fulfillment. To understand what you truly gain at 40, you must first recognize what you inevitably lose while being young. The young live inside an invisible prison, a prison built from expectations, social pressure, and a relentless urgency to prove their worth. At 20, every choice feels permanent, every mistake catastrophic, every rejection the end of the world. You live haunted by constant anxiety about the future and by an almost desperate hunger for external validation. The young are obsessed with constructing an identity, with finding their place in the world, with demonstrating that they matter. This obsession keeps them locked in a state of permanent tension. They can never completely relax because they are always performing for an invisible audience. Jung observed that youth confuses intensity with depth. They believe that because they feel everything so strongly, they are living more fully. But youthful intensity is like a fire that burns everything too quickly. It glows brightly, but it does not last. It does not create anything enduring. Youth is a time of frantic accumulation. You accumulate experiences, knowledge, contacts, achievements. But this accumulation comes at a cost: the inability to truly enjoy what you already possess. You are always looking forward, toward the next goal, the next level. Think back to your own youth. How often did you really enjoy the present moment without worrying about what would come next? Now, here comes Jung's revelation, the one that changes everything. When you reach 40, something fundamental shifts in your relationship with life. It is not that you have lost the capacity to dream or to desire, it is that you have gained something infinitely more precious: the capacity to discern. The young want everything. Those at 40 know what is worth wanting. This discernment is not pessimism or resignation. On the contrary, it is liberation. When you know what truly matters, you can direct all your energy there. You no longer waste time on things that add no real value to your life. Jung described this as the beginning of individuation, the state where the soul finds inner balance. But individuation is not passivity. It is the peace that comes from knowing exactly where to invest your being. It is the confidence born from having tried many things and knowing what truly works. By 40, you have experienced enough disappointment to understand that most of what society tells you to pursue are illusions. You have chased enough external goals to realize that happiness does not come from outside in. The young constantly seek extraordinary experiences. Those at 40 have discovered that the extraordinary lies in the depth of ordinary moments. They have learned to draw more pleasure from a single profound conversation than from 1,000 superficial adventures. Yet here is the hidden secret. This capacity for discernment gives you a power the young cannot imagine. The power to say no without guilt. The power to choose solitude over empty company. The power to value quality over quantity in everything you do. Modern society has created a dangerous myth that life begins to decline after 30. This myth is a lie designed to sell you products, services, and lifestyles you do not need. The truth is exactly the opposite. Life truly begins at 40, not because you have more resources or stability, but because at last you have clarity. Jung understood that maturity brings a unique ability, the gift of distinguishing between authentic pleasures and false ones. The young chase any stimulus that promises happiness. The mature know which pleasures actually nourish the soul. This distinction is revolutionary. It means that at 40, you can experience deeper satisfaction with less effort. You can find greater joy in the simplest things because you have cultivated the sensitivity to truly appreciate them. The young crave constant validation because their sense of worth depends on external sources. Those at 40 have developed an inner wellspring of validation. They no longer need others to confirm their value because they already know it. This emotional independence is liberating in a way impossible to explain to someone who has not yet lived it. It is the difference between begging for approval and offering your presence as a gift. But here lies the trap few recognize. Society programs you to feel shame about aging precisely because it does not want you to discover this power. It wants you to keep consuming, comparing, seeking external approval. A 40-year-old who knows their worth is far less manipulable than an insecure youth. Here is what Jung uncovered, a truth that changes the entire game. At 40, you have not lost the ability to feel intensely. You have gained the ability to feel selectively. You can now choose where to place your emotional energy instead of letting circumstances decide for you. The young feel everything with the same intensity because they have no filters. It is exhausting. The mature have developed refined filters that allow them to amplify what is worth feeling and diminish what has no value. This means that when you love at 40, you love more deeply than you did when you were young. When you feel excitement, it is because it truly deserves your excitement. When you choose to spend time with someone, it is because that person genuinely enriches your life. The paradox is fascinating. By becoming more selective, you become capable of more authentic connection. By reducing the number of things you care about, you increase the quality of your care. Jung described this as the unfolding of eros, not the shallow pleasure we associate with fleeting desire, but the profound joy that arises from living in harmony with your authentic nature. And this joy is only possible when you have lived enough to discover who you really are. The young are always trying to become someone. At 40, you can finally relax into simply being yourself. And this relaxation is not complacency. It is the ground from which real growth becomes possible. Consider for a moment how much energy you waste trying to be someone other than who you naturally are. Once you stop fighting against your own nature, all that energy is freed to create, to love, and to experience life in ways that were impossible while you were at war with yourself. So how can you begin to access this power before 40? Or how can you make the most of it if you are already there? Jung offered a simple but profound method. With every decision, ask yourself, does this bring me closer to inner wholeness or further away from it? It is not a question of comfort or ease, but of authenticity and inner peace. Begin to practice the art of conscious discrimination. Instead of automatically saying yes to everything that comes your way, cultivate the habit of pausing and reflecting. Does this opportunity, this relationship, this activity truly align with your deepest values? Most people never ask this question because they fear discovering they are living a life they never consciously chose. But this is precisely the liberation you need. Develop what Jung called true self-awareness. Not about being conservative or fearful, but about being strategic with your life. The most valuable resources you have are not money or time, but your attention and emotional energy. Spend them wisely. Cultivate relationships grounded in genuine affinity instead of convenience or status. At 40, you have no time to waste on superficial ties, which means you can invest more deeply in those that truly matter. Learn to find joy in simplicity without mistaking it for mediocrity. There is an enormous difference between a simple life chosen with awareness and a simple life imposed by lack of options. The first is liberation. The second is limitation. Carl Jung had a very specific practice that he recommended for those who had reached maturity: the inventory of authentic pleasures. Each week, dedicate time to identify which experiences gave you real satisfaction versus which were nothing more than empty distractions. The young confuse stimulation with fulfillment. They constantly seek new experiences because they have not learned to extract the complete value from the ones they already have. Adults in their 40s have developed what we could call sophisticated palates for life. Just as a sommelier can find more delight in a single glass of good wine than a novice in an entire bottle, a mature person can extract more joy from a deep conversation than a youth from an entire weekend of shallow diversions. This refinement of pleasure is not snobbery, it is emotional efficiency. When you know precisely what kinds of experiences nourish your soul, you can design a life that includes them regularly instead of chasing them desperately in rare moments. The 40s also bring you something that Jung considered essential: the ability to enjoy quality solitude. The young flee from being alone because solitude confronts them with questions about their identity they cannot yet answer. Mature adults have made peace with those questions and can use solitude as a space of creativity and reflection. This comfort with solitude frees you from relationships and activities you only seek in order to avoid being with yourself. You can choose company because you genuinely enjoy it, not because you need it to escape your own thoughts. But there is a specific ability that marks the difference between those who thrive after 40 and those who merely survive. This ability is the power to redefine success in your own terms instead of accepting the definitions others created for you. The young chase success through external metrics: money, status, recognition, power. Mature adults who have embraced Jung's wisdom define success completely differently: by the quality of their days, the depth of their relationships, and the alignment between values and actions. This redefinition is not rationalization of failure, it is evolution into a more sophisticated way of measuring a life truly lived. It is shifting from quantity to quality, from accumulation to appreciation, from external recognition to inner satisfaction. When you make this transition, something magical occurs. You stop competing in games you never chose to play. You stop measuring your worth by standards that never made you happy. You begin to live from your authentic center instead of from the expectations of others. The young live in the future, always chasing the next version of themselves. Mature adults have learned to inhabit the present fully, not because they abandoned growth, but because they understood that real growth accepts completely where you are now. This acceptance of the present gives you access to a kind of happiness impossible when you are constantly trying to escape your current reality. It is the difference between conditional happiness, I will be happy when, and unconditional happiness, I can find satisfaction in what is. Jung observed something fascinating about this transition. People who reached their 40s with this understanding developed what he called emotional self-sufficiency. It does not mean they need no one, but that their well-being does not depend on the approval or behavior of others. The young live emotional roller coasters because their inner state is at the mercy of external factors. What others think of them, whether they get what they want, whether things go according to plan. Mature adults have developed an emotional stability that allows them to enjoy good moments without clinging desperately to them, and to pass through difficult ones without being destroyed by them. This stability is not coldness or indifference. It is the opposite. It is the ability to feel deeply without being dragged by the emotions. It is like being a tree with deep roots that can bend with the wind without breaking. Moreover, by 40, you have accumulated enough cycles of pain and healing to understand something revolutionary: that suffering is temporary, but the capacity to overcome it is permanent. This understanding liberates you from the paralyzing fear that keeps the young trapped in comfort zones. The person who emerges from this transformation no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. Their worth is not in question. Their place in the world needs no justification. This silent confidence is magnetic in a way youthful arrogance can never be. What you truly gain at 40, according to the wisdom of Jung, is not consolation for lost youth. It is the prize for having lived long enough to distinguish between what only appears valuable and what really is. You have earned the freedom to be selective without being elitist, the capacity to say no without explanation, the power to choose depth over breadth, the wisdom to value tranquility over constant excitement. But there exists an additional dimension that Jung discovered while observing people in different stages of life. At 40, you develop what he called immunity to collective illusions. Fashions, trends, and social pressures that move the masses no longer affect you in the same way. The young are like leaves in the wind, constantly influenced by the latest cultural currents. Adults in their 40s are like rocks in the river. The water flows around them, but they maintain their shape and position, not because they are rigid, but because they have found their center of gravity. This immunity allows you to see the recurring patterns of society with crystalline clarity. You can observe how every generation believes its problems are unique, how every era convinces itself it is living unprecedented times, how the same human dynamics repeat with new disguises. This historical perspective does not make you cynical. It makes you wise. You can participate in life without being a victim of its temporary dramas. You can contribute to the world without being lost in its collective neuroses. The 40s also give you something Jung valued greatly: the ability to mentor without the need to control. You can share your wisdom without being attached to whether others follow it. You can offer your experience as a gift, not as an imposition. But more than all this, you have gained something no youth can fully comprehend: the ability to be at peace with yourself. Not the peace of resignation, but the peace of conscious choice. The peace of someone who has tasted many versions of life and has chosen the one that truly belongs to them. The young search for experiences that make them feel alive. Adults in their 40s have discovered that being truly alive means being completely present in the experience they are having now, without needing it to be extraordinary to be valuable. This is the great inversion society does not want you to discover. You have been taught to fear aging, but in truth, you should fear a youth that never evolves into authentic maturity. You should fear reaching 60 without ever discovering who you really are beneath all the expectations and roles you performed. Jung understood that life is not a race towards some final destination. It is a practice of living well each day according to your deepest values. And this practice becomes possible in a completely new way when at last you have the clarity and confidence to do it. The real tragedy is not aging. The real tragedy is wasting the years of maturity trying to recreate youth instead of embracing the unique powers only experience can give you. If you could live the rest of your life completely free from the need to impress others, what would you choose to do differently starting tomorrow? Share in the comments what has been the greatest change in your perspective upon reaching maturity. What have you discovered about yourself that you did not know when you were younger? If you enjoyed this reflection, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos, and join this journey of inner transformation together. And remember, as Carl Jung taught, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. How much of yourself have you been forced to kill just to keep a job? Because no one tells you this. To fit into the modern workplace, you will betray yourself 1,000 times and even clap while doing it. They cut out your tongue and you smile. They extinguish your soul and you hand in reports. They demand you fake enthusiasm while you collapse inside, and you call it professionalism. But what you are really living is a slow disappearance, an elegant form of emotional suicide, dressed in uniform and access badge. You work surrounded by masks, by empty applause, by bosses who call you family, yet would deliver you to the void the moment you stop being useful. Because in this theater, everyone acts, everyone lies, and to survive, you have learned to act as well. Each time you silence your thoughts, each time you endure what you do not deserve, each time you swallow injustice to protect your position, you are not preserving a salary, you are preserving a prison. Air-conditioned, yes, but a prison still. And the cruelest part is that they taught you to feel grateful for it, as if being drained until dry were a privilege, as if having a job were reason enough to annihilate your spirit. You have mistaken stability for submission, security for exhaustion, responsibility for silence. But the truth is darker. You are paying with your emotional life for something that is not worth it. This is not about employment. It is about the price you pay for pretending. Welcome to the theater of betrayal. Let us begin. Work has become a modern religion. It does not matter if it destroys you, if it sickens you, if every Monday feels heavier than the one before, as long as you perform, as long as you produce, as long as you remain silent. For in this temple, sacrifice is law, and silence is virtue. But no one told you that to worship this religion, you must become your own executioner. Each time you deny what you feel to keep the job, you are not strong. You are obedient, domesticated, conditioned like Pavlov's dog who smiles at the word bonus while rotting inside. Do you feel it? That knot in your throat when someone humiliates you and you only lower your head. That weight in your chest when you run to the restroom just to breathe because you cannot cry at your desk. That trembling in your hands when you fake composure in a meeting, though everything is falling apart. That is not stress. It is your soul screaming that you are letting it die for a contract. And you know it, but you prefer not to listen, because fear of losing the opportunity is stronger than your dignity. Carl Jung said that the one who knows the why of his life can endure almost any how. But do you really have a why? Or are you just enduring out of inertia, fear, habit? Because without purpose, work is not nobility. It is torture with a paycheck. You are not building a life. You are postponing your funeral, day after day, hour after hour, meeting after meeting. And no, this is not an attack on work itself. It is an attack on what you are doing to yourself in the name of work, waking with anxiety and calling it commitment, swallowing frustration and calling it resilience, denying yourself rest and calling it excellence. You are confusing exploitation with discipline. You are calling a career what is actually a slow descent. You are using success as an excuse to justify submission. Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we create to survive society. You wear it every day. You walk into the office and become functional, polite, adapted, but false. Because if you were authentic, if you spoke as you thought, if you acted as you felt, you would risk being fired. So you choose not to be you. And there begins the real resignation, not of your job, but of your essence. Do you see it? You have learned to love your cell, to decorate your prison with motivational quotes and productivity planners, to call every promotion a victory while it drags you further from who you wanted to be. And when something feels wrong, when something inside breaks, you smother it with more work, more tasks, more distractions, because you prefer being busy to being conscious. Consciousness hurts, but how long can you resist? How long will you exchange your life force for external validation? How long will you let your worth be defined by a boss who does not even know you? Look at yourself. You are not lazy. You are not weak. You are not insufficient. You are someone slowly molded into obedience, to produce, not to question, to please, not to live. But this is not destiny. It is programming, and you still have time to break it. If you dare to see what is truly happening, you will realize the greatest betrayal is not between you and your employer. It is between you and your own conscience. Because each time you endure what you do not deserve, you know it. Each time they lie to your face and you nod politely, you know it. Each time you defend a company that would never defend you, you know it. But you remain silent because you are afraid, because you depend, because if you speak, you may lose the privilege of being useful to a system that does not see you as human, but as function. And the cruel irony is, you believe you are free because you can choose where to work. But you cannot choose not to work, because if you stop, you die, literally or symbolically. You were taught that if you are not producing, you are worthless, that if you are not busy, you are failing, that if you are not climbing, you are falling. So you run, endlessly, without even knowing why. Jung would say, the will is not driven toward happiness, but toward survival. Modern work exploits that. It keeps you busy enough not to think, rewarded enough not to rebel, exhausted enough not to question if it makes sense. And they achieve it with small doses of recognition, a public compliment, a meaningless promotion, a minimal raise after years of exhaustion, like tossing candy to a dog after the trick. And you celebrate it, post it on social media, thank it with tears, as if your worth were for sale, as if that justified all the days you were ignored, used, diminished. But this is not just about salary. It is about dignity, mental health, and how much of yourself you have lost by not daring to draw a line. This is not about working hard. It is about a culture that glorifies self-exploitation, that tells you, give your best, when what it really means is, give your last breath, then stay silent, and you obey. You push yourself when sick, you smile when broken, you stay quiet when you should scream. And when you finally collapse, they blame you. They say you lacked emotional intelligence, that you were not strong enough. It does not matter how much you gave. If you break, you are disposable. That is how this theater works. Applause when you follow the script. Silence when you fall behind the curtain. Jung spoke of individuation, the journey to authenticity. But that journey demands rebellion. It demands removing the mask, confronting the shadow, admitting you are living a life you did not choose. Because even if your job is legal, it can be profoundly immoral toward yourself. Not because it is evil, but because it steals the most valuable thing you own: your time, your energy, your freedom to think. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, if money were not required, would you still do this? Would you still sit 8 hours before a screen? Would you still answer emails that mean nothing? Obey bosses you do not respect? Fake passion for projects that hold no meaning? If the answer is no, then you are not working. You are merely surviving. And that is not living. It is automatic resistance, routine as anesthesia, silent exile from your true self. And the longer you stay in this theater, the harder it will be to leave, because the persona fuses to the skin, because the employee suit clings to your identity, until you forget that once you dreamed of something else. There is a question you have not asked yourself in years. When did you stop being you? It was not overnight. It was slow, imperceptible, systematic. The first time you said yes when you wanted to say no. The first time you stayed late just to appear committed. The moment you stopped speaking as you thought and started speaking as expected, that is where the small daily deaths began, where the character replaced the soul. And you accepted it, thinking it was maturity. But it was not growth, it was surrender. Carl Jung said that men must face either integration or disintegration. The system does both. It conquers with order, illusions, and the comfort of belonging. Then it destroys with fatigue, deception, and the erosion of the self. Because when you no longer serve its purpose, no matter what you offered, you are dismissed, reduced to another shadow, an empty space quickly occupied by someone who still clings to the belief that their true value can be discovered there. And what do? You try harder, you give more, thinking your loyalty will be rewarded. But this game is not designed to honor the brave. It is designed to consume the obedient. The one who endures most does not win. He withers. The one who stays silent is not strong. He becomes invisible. The one who adapts best does not triumph. He disappears. And when you try to rebel, the theater already owns you. You have bills, responsibilities, fear. Because the system did not just give you employment, it gave you identity. And without that identity, you do not know who you are. What would you do if tomorrow you were dismissed? Who would you face in the mirror if you were no longer useful? You have tied your existence so tightly to a paycheck that now freedom terrifies you. Carl Jung called it the image of the domesticated man, the one who has lost his inner will to power, who no longer seeks to create, but only to belong, who no longer dares to break, but only to preserve, who does not live, but merely repeats. That is who you become. If you never pause, if you never question, if you never shake off the dust and ask yourself, does what I do each day bring me closer to myself or further away? And no, it is not about abandoning everything overnight. It is not about burning bridges or living off the air. It is about awakening, about refusing to normalize what poisons you, about ceasing to justify what dims you, about daring to see that what destroys you is not the work itself, but the way you inhabit it, the way you surrendered without resistance, the way you allowed your calling to be replaced by a role. Because yes, you can be more than an employee, more than a title, more than a number in an organizational chart, but you will never be if you continue worshipping a system that feeds on your sacrifice. You will not be while you believe your worth depends on a polished email or a forced smile in Monday's meeting. You will not be while you call success anything that distances you from your truth. Look around. How many colleagues appear alive outside but are already dead within? How many endure, keep silent, medicate themselves, disconnect? And how much longer will you endure? Because there comes a point when the body begins to speak with insomnia, with anxiety, with exhaustion that cannot be explained. It is not stress. It is your soul crying for help. And if you do not listen, it will demand payment later. You do not have to quit today, but you must awaken. Because if you do not, one day you will open your eyes and there will be nothing left of you. Only a file, a performance record, and the echo of a voice that once dreamed of freedom. The greatest trap is not the job itself. It is the idea that you cannot escape it, that stopping means collapse, that pausing means falling behind, that questioning means being ungrateful. You are programmed to fear the void, to believe that stillness means death. But what you do not see is that living without pause, without meaning, without purpose, is also a form of dying, slower, more elegant, but equally real. and you hardly notice because you are so immersed in the system that you no longer distinguish abuse from duty, exhaustion from commitment, or collapse from excellence. How many times have you said, "I have to work," when in reality you meant, "I have to pretend everything is fine so I don't lose it all"? How many times have you called a demand a goal when it never mattered to you at all? How many times have you forced your body beyond its limits just to fulfill something that gave you nothing in return? And yet you keep doing it because you were taught that endurance is admirable, that postponing life is wise, that constant effort, even in absurdity, is a virtue. But for whom? Who benefits from your sacrifice? Who celebrates your self-censorship, your overexertion, your silent surrender? Jung said it clearly, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And you have called this fate, this silent martyrdom, this belief that life must be suffering, emptiness, strangled hearts, and sleeping minds. You called it maturity. But what you have chosen is not maturity, it is resignation. It is surrender, disguised as wisdom. It is turning your cage into a life plan. And if you are honest, you know it. You know you are not yourself when you fake interest in projects you despise. You know you are not yourself when you wear motivation on Monday mornings while inside you want to disappear. You know you are not yourself when you type polite emails while biting your tongue to avoid screaming. And you know it, but you do nothing because you learned that feeling is dangerous, that speaking truth is costly, that showing yourself exposes you. So you remain silent, adapt, comply, applaud what you hate, swallow anger as though it were part of the contract. And each time you do, you lose something. Not all at once, but slowly. You lose presence, you lose clarity, you lose soul. And at the end of the day, you wonder why you are so tired when you did not do much. But you did a lot. You acted a role all day, and sustaining a constant lie is exhausting. The system does not want you free, it wants you functional. It does not care if you think, only if you obey. It does not value your truth, only your performance. And you have confused service with worth. You were sold the idea that results grant you safety, and you believed it, like a child trading love for good behavior, like an adult trading dignity for approval. And the darkest truth is that when you finally wake up, you are already chained to a loan, to a mortgage, to a life built out of fear. Because the system is designed so you never stop, so you never question, so you keep spinning like a wheel, like a machine, like a happy slave. That is the great theater of normality, where everyone pretends to be fine, pretends to be in control, pretends to celebrate success, while burning from the inside. But you can still break it, because as long as there remains one thread of awareness, one spark of discomfort, one fragment of memory of who you were before the exhaustion, not everything is lost. That discomfort you feel right now is not weakness. It is a signal, a warning, a door. And that door I speak of is not magical. It offers no applause, no likes, no guarantees. That door is called facing yourself, and it is the hardest to open because it demands admitting that for years you lived on autopilot, mistaking productivity for value, filling your schedule so you would not hear your soul, joining the perfect choreography where everyone moves, yet no one knows why. Do you see? This system does not enslave you by force. It convinces you that slavery is your choice. It makes you complicit in your own disappearance, and you collaborate with your time, your energy, your silence. Because if you stopped, if you screamed, if you looked with eyes wide open, you would collapse. Not because you are weak, but because you have endured the unbearable for too long. For this is not only about work, it is about everything you buried inside just to keep functioning. Your anger, your grief, your true, "I don't want this." You buried it all under a professional smile, and now you no longer know how to recover who you once were. Jung spoke of the eternal return, the idea that your life repeats infinitely exactly as it is, again and again. Ask yourself with brutal honesty, if your current routine were to repeat for eternity, could you bear it? Could you live this way forever, without breaking, without becoming cynical, without losing completely the ability to feel? If the answer is no, then why are you still here? Why do you keep calling life what is only decorated resistance? Of course, leaving means losing. Losing comfort. Losing the role that grants you status. Losing the narrative of "I can handle it all." And yes, that is frightening, because we have grown so accustomed to measuring ourselves by what we do that we do not know who we are when we stop doing. Your identity has been hijacked by performance, and letting go of performance confronts you with the abyss. And Jung would call this the dark night of the soul, the point where you can no longer live as before, but do not yet know how to live differently, where the old collapses, but the new has not yet been born. It is a place of silence, of emptiness, of symbolic death, and few dare to enter, because it feels easier to keep playing the role, to keep the mask, to keep being useful, even if it costs you your truth. But listen, your worth is not in what you do. It is in what you refuse to betray, even when no one sees it. It is in the dignity of setting a boundary, even if your voice shakes. It is in the courage to say, "This is not me," while others applaud. That is where the real work begins, the work of reclaiming your power, your voice, your time, your life. And yes, it will hurt, because building an escape from within the system is brutal, because no one will applaud you for breaking what destroys you, because you will feel like you are losing when in truth you are finding yourself. But that pain, that fear, that unease that pierces you when you imagine leaving or changing is not proof you are wrong. It is proof you are finally waking up. Awakening hurts, but sleeping through your life kills you slowly. And here you are, on the edge, with consciousness whispering at your neck, with this voice that does not speak sweetly, but speaks truth. The question is, will you keep repeating the act, or will you have the courage to step off the stage? Stepping off does not mean disappearing. It means ceasing to act. And that is why it terrifies you. Because the character you have built gave you approval, structure, acceptance, even affection, but always at the cost of living out of alignment with yourself. You are not tired of work. You are tired of pretending, of sustaining a life that does not resemble what your soul whispered when you were a child, of fitting into a narrative you did not write. Because in the end, what burns you is not the task itself, it is the forgetting of yourself. And in that forgetting, modern illnesses bloom. Anxiety, insomnia, emptiness, existential crises without a name. You go to the doctor, and they give you pills. You go to human resources, and they suggest breathing exercises. But no one tells you the truth, that perhaps your body is reacting to a daily betrayal. It is not a chemical imbalance. It is a collapse of meaning. It is not a disorder. It is your soul crying out from beneath the uniform. Carl Jung wrote that all power rests on perception, and the world of work knows it well. That is why they flood you with speeches. You are part of a family. You are valued here. Together, we are stronger. But you are not family. You are not indispensable. You are a piece that works, as long as it works. When it doesn't, another will replace you. No drama, no guilt, no memory, because the system has no heart, only objectives. And you know it, because you have already seen it with others, because you saw how that colleague who gave everything was dismissed as if nothing, because you saw how your team was replaced without even being asked, because you saw how the human discourse collapses when the budget tightens. And yet, you stay. You keep believing that if you give more, they won't do the same to you. But they will, not because they are evil, but because that is how the game is built. And you still play it as if it were real. Jung explained it. The human being is torn between desire and suffering. And you desire so much to be someone in this world that you are willing to suffer anything, just not to disappear. But disappearing is exactly what you are doing. You are evaporating in empty tasks, dissolving in foreign goals. You are fading away in meeting rooms where no one hears what you truly think. You are ceasing to be, only to remain present. And you call it success. Yet true success is not climbing a hierarchy, it is not betraying yourself while you do. True success is not a position, but having soul at the end of the day. True success is not a framed photo, but being able to sleep without anxiety, inhabit yourself without shame, breathe without fear of failure. But no one teaches you this, because if you knew, you would stop being useful. And you have been useful for so long that you no longer know how to be free. So, what remains? To look, to write what you have not dared to say, to silence the noise and listen to what you have avoided, to embrace discomfort, to question, to stop running for one day, just to see what appears in the silence. Because in that silence, there may not be certainty, but there is truth. Your truth, the one you buried to survive, the one that only returns if you are willing to lose something to gain yourself. And yes, it will hurt, but it is a much fairer price than giving your life to the applause of strangers who won't be there when you fall. Work is not the enemy. The enemy is living asleep inside of it. The enemy is not knowing when to say enough. The enemy is silencing yourself so much that one day you no longer remember the sound of your own voice. Because at the end of it all, one question remains. How much longer will you keep selling yourself cheap? Because that is what you are doing. Trading your time for coins, your health for status, your peace for belonging. And you know it. You feel it every morning when you open your eyes to a void no coffee can fill. You feel it when you return home with heavy shoulders and a soul on pause. You feel it when you celebrate achievements that no longer move you, because deep down, you know they are not yours. And the cruelest part is that you have become good at it, efficient, admired, accomplished, because you have perfected the art of performing without feeling, producing without asking why. And that has taken you farther from yourself than any failure ever could, because failure at least breaks you. But success in what you do not love numbs you, polishes you, turns you into a shining statue, but hollow. Carl Jung warned, when you live from the mask, the soul withdraws, and when the soul withdraws, you begin living as if you were another. Same body, same name, but something within is absent, as though the lights were on, but no one was home. That is the sensation you cannot name, the one that haunts you each time you stop for a second. That is the echo of your forgotten self, pounding from within, begging to return. But returning to yourself is not achieved with Sunday meditation or Instagram phrases. It comes through rupture, through discomfort, through raw silence, through choices no one else will understand. Because the system does not reward those who awaken. It rewards those who adapt, those who never ask questions, those who smile while dying inside. And you cannot keep going. You should not. Because if this message is doing its work, something inside you is about to collapse. And that is not failure. It is necessary. Collapse is the doorway to truth, the fall of the theater, the fire that exposes what you tried so hard to hide, that you are not well, that you don't know who you are, that you no longer want to go on like this. And admitting that is not defeat, it is awakening. It is the beginning of another way of living. More uncomfortable, yes, but more real. And what does living differently mean? It means no longer applauding what does not represent you. It means setting limits where you once made excuses. It means working without disappearing, participating without betraying yourself, being present without dissolving. And if that means losing a position, a promotion, a pat on the back, so be it. Because if being above requires being far from yourself, then you are not above. You are absent, empty, forgotten. Real power is not climbing in a broken system. It is the courage of not needing it. It is reclaiming your time, your voice, your ability to look in the mirror without disguise. It is not begging for respect where there is only use. It is realizing you are worth more than your performance, that your life cannot depend on whether another approves your existence. This is the moment when something shifts, when noise can no longer cover truth, when the play ends and the lights turn on. And there you are, alone in the center of the stage, with a single choice: to step down, not to escape, but to live, not to lose, but to begin, not to surrender, but to return to yourself. And now that you have seen it, you cannot pretend you do not know. You can no longer go back to routine as if nothing happened, because this time something cracked, a fracture opened, and through it, truth begins to enter. Perhaps you will not resign tomorrow. Perhaps you will not hold every answer. Yet you will no longer sleep so peacefully within a life you know is not yours, because true transformation begins when something within you refuses to lie any longer. So tell me, will you continue to stay silent just to preserve your place in this theater? Or will you begin to live from where it truly matters? The question is not whether you can, it is whether you are willing to pay the price. For freedom is not comfort, it is integrity. And to live with integrity in a world that rewards submission is, as Carl Jung revealed, the most revolutionary act you can choose. If this truth has pierced you, even slightly, subscribe, turn on notifications, but above all, do not leave unchanged. And if you have reached this point, comment. I was not born to pretend, not for me, but for you, to remind what you are about to recover, because this time you will not betray yourself again. No more.